Welcome to the Sales Enablement Innovation Podcast, brought to you by the Sales Enablement Collective. Each episode, we sit down with sales enablement and revenue leaders from around the world and invite them to share their expertise and experience with the community. On this episode, we spoke to SEC One to Watch and Sales Enablement Manager at Mission Cloud, Shannon Story, about how to achieve onboarding success as a one-person enablement team. I hope you enjoy our conversation. On the show today is Shannon Story, who is an SEC One to Watch for 2024. Shannon, thank you for coming on to the show. Really appreciate it.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
So before we sort of dive into our topic for today, we're going to be talking about onboarding. Could you sort of introduce yourself to our listeners, give a bit of background on yourself and sort of how you've gotten to this point in your career as well?
Yeah, sure. So as most enablers find themselves, I have a very interesting past. I feel like every person in sales enablement has a different past, but I actually started in public education. So I was a school teacher and found myself constantly trying to help other teachers and create better processes and programs. I transitioned into virtual teaching and from there up into more administrative roles and then into the sales side of that virtual teaching position. So I got really interested in sales and sales enablement, especially, and how we can make people better at what they do. So it kind of, all came together really well for me. My love for educating people, for helping adults and helping people be better at what they do. So I'm currently working at a tech company doing sales enablement, and I am the only sales enablement person there. So started the sales enablement program, and I'm the one that keeps it going.
I love that, and I especially love the sort of the way the teaching angle can sort of lead into sales enablement. It's such a natural fit, and it's really cool to see the sort of different backgrounds that you do get in sales enablement. And so today's topic, like I mentioned, we're going to be diving into onboarding, but specifically onboarding as a one-person team. Like you mentioned, you're the only enabler, and that's something you sort of managed to do successfully. So I think, how do you sort of start the process of building an onboarding program as a sort of solo sales enablement professional? I can imagine it's quite daunting when you've got so much to do. What do you do in terms of starting the process and sort of allocating your time and making sure that you're getting the onboarding done, but then other responsibilities aren't sort of being neglected as well?
Yeah, for sure. So I was in a really fortunate situation when I joined Mission where they knew that onboarding was the number one priority. So I was able to really prioritize that over a lot of other things. Of course, there's always other things on our plate. We're never just able to focus on one thing at a time. But I was able to carve out a big chunk of time for it. And I think that is actually a really important part of creating an onboarding plan is allocating enough time and dedication to it. I really started by just going around getting to know all of the key stakeholders for the sellers and how they're going to need to be onboarded. I spent a lot of time with our CRO, with him going through what he saw as the elements that a new account executive would need to be successful, and him kind of giving me his vision of what he thinks onboarding should be. But of course, one thing that I also like to do is get the perspective of everyone involved. So I also worked with the VP of sales. I would talk to the managers. I would talk to newly onboarded AEs who were onboarded before I got there. I would talk to veteran AEs, get their perspective, and kind of start to draw a picture in my head of how can we get the sellers on the right path as quickly as possible, and how do we put it out to them in a way that's easily digestible, easy to track, and fun also, because I don't think anyone really likes to do unfun things. So the first, I kind of, when I was thinking about this, I kind of broke it down by like, well, what did I do? How did I get from no onboarding structure at all to a complete onboarding package that we now have? And so the first thing was you have to start with the bigger picture of where are we trying to get these reps and by when. And once we had that nailed down, it was easy to then go and say, okay, well, then if that's our main goal, what do they need to be doing by 30 days? What do they need to be doing by 60 days, by 90 days, by 120? And mapping out those key goals and milestones at all of those marks, plus the ramping KPIs. And that was one that I honestly did not do to start. I just had the key milestones and goals. And then as we were onboarding people, I was like, oh my gosh, you know what? We never correlated this to their key performance indicators that they're going to be expected to need to know by the end, right? So we did a little bit of working back and looked at, okay, well, if they need to get to this KPI by 120 days, what does that KPI look like? A little watered down at 90 days and a little more watered down at 60 days. So having that framework to work off of was so important. Getting that 30, 60, 90 day, 120 day, even if you need. But then you'll quickly see that there is just a laundry list within each of those, right? Of things that need to happen and all the tasks that go into making those milestones happen and those goals. So once I started doing that, I started looking into it and I was like, you know what? These really fit into two different categories of things that we're asking our reps to do as they onboard. We're going to have our training and our key activities, I call them. So these are things like an on-demand course or a page they need to review or some sort of recording they're going to watch or a training they're going to attend, a live training. Those are all the things that you're doing. You're checking those things off. You're learning those things. But then we also have a whole bucket of mentoring and coaching. So whether that's working with the sales enablement team, working with your manager, we have peer ambassadors here at Mission that you get paired up with. So also doing that, getting them aligned with their peer ambassador so that they can coach them through those just-in-time coachings. So I started breaking down each month into those two buckets and really staggering it so that it's not so overwhelming. It's much easier to look at a month's snapshot than 4 month snapshot, right? That's not really a snapshot. That's more like an essay. From there, breaking that down even smaller. So the last thing I want to do when we onboard a rep is hand them a list of 75 tasks to do within the first 2 months, right? Like that is just going to blow your mind and you're going to feel very defeated very quickly. So broke it down into chunks by weeks. So the first 2 weeks, you have a chunk of things to do. Second 2 weeks, you have a chunk to do. And then you move on to month 2. And then, just from like a human psychology aspect, who doesn't love a good checklist? How good do you feel when you can check something off your to-do list? So we utilize Asana here at Mission. So I put all of this into Asana where we can share that board. I can share it with their manager. I can share it with their manager's manager, my manager. Everyone can see it. And we can also use it as a way to keep notes about what's happening. We can check things off as we go. I have different meetings on there. So it's a really good, simple way for them to track what they need to be doing and for there to be really good visibility into it. We can also pull reports through it. So those were like the main things that were establishing the actual, what are we doing for onboarding? And then the last element that really took it to the next level was I mapped out what we described as the onboarding enablement operational model. So you have all this material, all these coaching plans and mentoring plans and all these things that your new onboarding reps are going to do. But how are you, as the sales enablement person, making sure that you're keeping track of what's happening? Because it's rare that you're going to be onboarding just one person at a time, right? We onboard a couple at a time. I know bigger companies will have big onboarding classes. But usually, we got real busy at one point. I think I had 10 people onboarding, but they were all kind of at staggered points. So how am I keeping track of this person's in week 1, but this person's in week 6? And so we made the operational model. And what I did for that was I just created a way for me to make sure that I'm checking off all of the pre-work that needs to be done. So as soon as I know we have a new hire coming, I'm building their Asana board. I'm putting calendar invites on their calendar. I'm reaching out to their manager. I'm pairing them up with a peer ambassador. Those are all the things that I need to check off. That doesn't have anything to do with the new person. That's what am I doing as a sales enablement person. I schedule for every new hire, they get a one-on-one welcome call with me. We all know coming to a new company, coming to a new role can be very nerve-wracking and you're not quite sure where to go, who to look to, and where you can find information. So I like to be one of those first faces they see. I spend a lot of time in these one-on-ones. And yes, when you're onboarding 10, 15 people at a time, it can take a lot of time out of your day, but it's worth it because you can establish that really good relationship with this new seller right off the bat, and you become a trusted person for them to come to when they have questions. A lot of times people don't want to go to their direct manager because they don't want to look like they don't know something, even though I'm like, you're brand new. You're not supposed to know it, But people get worried. So I like to tell them, I am a vault. I am a safe space. You come to me with the dumbest question and I will answer it. And if I don't have the answer, I will find someone who has the answer. So I really try to build that relationship, get to know them on a personal level, and establish that trust with them. So we do that the first week. I will schedule that. And then about 2 weeks in, so I know most of us can relate that when you're starting, a lot of times it's like drinking from a fire hose, right? There's so much information shoved at you. And about 2 weeks in is when I feel like people are finally like, okay, I've learned a lot, but I've also forgotten a lot, right? Because it's all just been, thrown at us. So, about 2 weeks in, I host what I call a power up training. So, this is a time where I will get a group together. So, this is not one on one. Usually, this is, like an onboarding class together. And we have an hour-long session where I go through the company org chart. I show them how things relate to their role, what teams do what, who they can go to if they have questions, how our different products and services align, and really just go over all those basic things, kind of like a refresher. But now that they have more information, they can put it into better context. So that was a game changer for onboarding, those power up sessions. I got really good feedback on those. People really liked them. It was another way to reinforce what they've been learning. And then it also just kind of, again, cemented that trust and relationship with them so that they knew they could come to me with those types of questions. Other than that, along the way, we have check-in sessions at the 15-day, 30-day, 60-day mark. I do surveys at 30, 60, 90 to see how they're doing. And then I also build in manager and peer ambassador check-ins where I meet with their manager and their peer ambassador, make sure they have everything they need, kind of get a pulse from the manager. Hey, how is this new hire doing? Where are you seeing gaps? How can I facilitate? So I just talked for a really long time because it's a really long process and it's not something that was built overnight. It took a good 6 months of building all of this out and then implementing it and then perfecting it, right? So it's something that I feel like is never going to be done. It is constantly being changed, updated. We're getting consistent, constantly getting feedback from the new hires of this worked, I didn't like this, I didn't understand this part, or this was crafted really well, and using that to continuously perfect our onboarding strategy.
That was really, really interesting. And I love the idea of the peer ambassadors and having, I think sometimes having someone at sort of your level, like a peer, it can be a little more approachable as well in terms of rather than, like you say, going to a manager and feeling like you're being told off or it's very formal. So I really love that
Right.
idea.
Yeah, and it's nice because they give that just in time touches. So if you're a new rep and you're about to, make the first account in Salesforce that you're wanting to log, you can reach out to that peer ambassador and they can walk you through it. I can make the best training in the world about how to do steps within Salesforce, but you're not going to remember it. You're not going to remember where to find it. You're going to need it when you need it. And so that's when those peer ambassadors are really valuable because they can step in for those just in time things and show them, yeah, this is how we do it. And you can go over here, you can click that. And it helps them to also find a friend within the company pretty quickly too, someone that they can go to.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I think the emphasis as well as a one person team, you're sort of spreading the load a little bit as well, and it's giving you a chance to breathe. One of the things I wanted to jump into as well was, so you touched on it a little bit, but in terms of like sort of measuring the success of the onboarding, and obviously it's iterative and you're sort of constantly building over it. In terms of, you touched on like sort of surveys and aligning to the KPIs, how do you make sure that sort of each section is ticking the right boxes and you're sort of the onboarding training is actually feeding into those KPIs? Like, are you looking at sort of time to first sale, time to ramp, those kind of things, the survey results? What are the sort of numbers that you're looking at to make sure you're on the right track?
Yeah, you kind of hit the nail on the head there. So we definitely look at the survey results. I think, in sales enablement surveys are are kind of a debate. People, I think we all agree that we need them, but then it's also like, well, how we can't rely solely on did someone like it. Just because you like my training does not mean that it was effective or that you remembered anything from it. It might have just been really fun. Like maybe I'm just a really fun person. I like to believe that at least. So, you know, we want to make sure that we're getting good survey results. We're taking that into consideration. But the hard data that we're going to be looking at really comes down to, are we hitting those KPIs? So are we getting, for instance, one of ours is a number of champions as partners, right? So are we able to point to 3 champions that they've established by a certain time period? So we will map those out and see, okay, yes, they hit this milestone. They can point to these 3 champions. Another big one is just the standard like time to first sale. We did find, so there'd been a long held belief that time to first sale was our biggest indicator for success for our AEs, right? So that was really what we were pushing AEs towards. As I started diving into the data and really pulling from, our top performers, the people who've been here a while, the newer people, new people who were really successful really quickly, and started looking at the data, we realized that really it's time to second sale that is the biggest indicator. So that first sale sometimes is, an act of good faith, or maybe they took over an account from somebody else and it was kind of already warm and they're just getting it across the finish line. But that second sale usually is when they are independently closing this sale. And that is a really good measure of success for our salespeople. Were they able to take that deal from the lead all the way through closed one? And how quickly were they able to do that? So I know a lot of enablement people can also kind of commiserate with me in the fact that a lot of times there's not enough data of what we would like to see. So you have to sometimes get creative in how you're finding the data or, getting to those bottom lines. But I was able to at least, track that, also tracking how many opportunities they're opening and how many are going to win, so that, the win rate and velocity, while it's not a perfect picture for us, we can still do some data collection on that. So it's also good to be able to look at that data and bring that to leadership and say, hey, I would love to be able to track this more accurately. How can we work together so that we can get some cleaner data here and we can start really tracking these other measures to show success? So it kind of leads you into some more avenues for finding stakeholders and partnerships that you can really establish with sales leadership.
That makes a lot of sense. And then, sort of on that similar note, what sort of technology and tools are you sort of using to help support that sort of data collection and just the onboarding process as a whole? I imagine you're sort of leveraging that quite a bit as a sort of solo enabler. You're leaning on that technology. What are your sort of keys to success in that sort of area? Especially, I'm thinking if people are looking to maybe adopt a particular tool, sort of what would you sort of, which direction would you point them in?
Yeah, no. I think the cool thing about tooling is you can be really scrappy and really creative with what you do and don't have. So I know it can be hard, especially like, again, I'm a sales enablement team of 1. I'm not going to have a massive budget where I can come in and be like, I need this tool and that tool, and they're just going to like hand me a bunch of tools. So, I have had to get a little bit creative. I will say for tracking onboarding, we tried a couple different methodologies, but what really stuck was using that Asana board for checking things off and communicating through there. You can set triggers through there as well, which is really nice. Our talent acquisition team and our talent development team, we also have a system that will trigger like reminders when you're onboarding. And so we use that system. Oh, I'm sorry, Daniel. I'm forgetting the name of it right now. I got to figure out the name of it.
It's no
We
problem.
might need to
To be
make a
honest,
note of that.
there's so many different tools and things like that it's actually difficult to remember. And they've always got interesting names as well. Like even Asana is an interesting one. It's
I
hard to
know.
keep track of sometimes.
I know. It is on the tip of my tongue and I cannot think of it. It'll come to me eventually. Okay, tooling. So we'll get back to it.
We can always drop it in the notes as well. That's no problem.
Yes. We'll get back to that one. I forget what it's called. Salesforce is, any CRM you have, you should be able to pull some really good reports from it as long as we're maintaining good hygiene in there. And so really, spent a lot of time in Salesforce, a lot of time creating my own reports through Google Sheets where I'm pulling the exact data that I need from Salesforce and putting into a Google Sheet. We also, I think most companies have a call recording system of some sort. So we would rely on those. You can make libraries of calls that, are really good example calls, and then have people go through and watch those recordings. So that was really helpful as well. We have e-learnings that we also utilize for just general learnings, like what do we sell, and what are our products and services, and how do we partner with people. So um, really getting scrappy, finding ways. I think the biggest thing for me when it comes to tooling is to be creative. Don't let a lack of tooling get in the way of you doing what needs to be done. And if you try something and it's a total bomb, like that's okay. Try something different. I had a couple of those when we first started the onboarding where I was like, oh, we'll just put it into this program and everyone will use it. And everyone's like, we're not doing that. And I'm like, okay, I guess we'll try something else. So, you have to listen to your audience, make sure that you're adjusting. But I think as long as, you can get very creative with your tooling, I don't think that's going to hold anyone back.
That makes sense, and I really like that sort of idea of the being scrappy with it and getting creative. One thing I did want to dive into as well a little bit is the idea of how do you sort of make sure that the sales managers and sort of getting them engaged with the onboarding in the way that you need them to. I think sometimes, depending on the organization, there can be a little bit of not butting heads, but the sales managers aren't quite as engaged in the onboarding as they should be. Enablement sort of chasing people down. How do you make sure that that sort of stakeholder to stakeholder sort of communication and collaboration is in the place it needs to be to make sure the onboarding actually runs properly?
Yeah, honestly, the biggest way to make sure that anything is received well is relationship building. I could make the best onboarding program ever known to man. I can make the best training ever known to man. But if I don't have a solid relationship with the people who I'm depending on to back this up, to make sure that we're staying on top of it and really speak highly of it, then it doesn't matter. I spent a lot of time when I first started here just getting to know people, finding ways to connect with people, ways for them to trust me. So whatever I could do to prove that I was competent and I could actually help them, it goes a long way when you spend a lot of time up front building those relationships. So I feel like, it's a really good balance of showing the proof. If you can show after the fact that you've implemented something, it's moved the needle, we've had success, that's great. And that is probably 50% of what you need to do. The other 50% is you need to have that relationship with the managers. You need to have that relationship with the managers' managers. You need to have all the stakeholders with you and with a single vision and all speaking to, this is what we're going to do, this is why it's valuable, look at the proof here, she's a trustworthy person and you need to rely on her. And that's going to get you way further than building the world's best program. So I think, as enablement people, I think most enablers can agree that a big part of our job is building bridges, building relationships, and maintaining them.
Absolutely. And in terms of that, is it mostly through Slack or Teams, or do you have sort of monthly meetings, or what is that? So how often are you actually keeping that sort of line going?
Yeah. Well, so we're very Slack centric at my company. So we do a lot of Slack. I try and get on the calendars with as many people as I can on a regular cadence. And then also stepping in where I can find myself helpful. So if I'm in a meeting and something comes up where a project's happening, I'll reach out personally to that manager and be like, "Hey, I want to help you with this. Let me know, like let's get together and brainstorm solutions." So I do, there's probably stakeholders I need to do a better job of having a regular cadence with, but there's nothing wrong with those, side conversations and one-offs as well.
I like that sort of being proactive as well and jumping in. I'm
Yeah.
keeping one eye on the time at the moment, but I do want to ask you before we wrap up in terms of what would be your sort of golden nugget of advice for, say, someone is a sort of solo sales enabler. They've been tasked with developing an onboarding program on their own. Sort of what is your yeah, golden piece of advice to sort of make sure they're going on the right track and sort of take that away from the recording and implement it in their sort of role?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think the biggest thing is to make sure that you are aligned with sales leadership on what they want to see come out of this onboarding program. So, no matter what is happening, no matter, again, you could build the world's best onboarding program. But if you are pointed in a completely different direction than the direction the sales leadership wants you to go, it's not going to take off and no one's going to actually take it seriously. So, making sure that you get early buy-in from sales leadership and that you maintain that buy-in by doing those regular check-ins along the way as you're building things, setting those meetings, reaching out to them. Hey, is this looking good? Is this about what you were thinking? Are we aligning here? You know, you can throw in your fun things that you want to put in there and your own little spin on it, but at the end of the day, it has to align with what sales leadership wants for it to be taken seriously and actually used.
100%. I really like that. I think that's unfortunately all we have time for, though. But Shannon, thank you so much for coming onto the show. I really appreciate it. I learned a lot, and I'm 100% sure our listeners will have as well. It was really insightful. So thank you for taking the time.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to the Sales Enablement Innovation Podcast. Be sure to follow us on your podcast platform of choice so you don't miss a thing. And if you're hungry for more sales enablement content, visit our website, salesenablementcollective.com, for articles, events, and an easy way to join our Slack community, home to thousands of your sales enablement peers.